glad that you're here this morning. It is a good number that we have, and I know we've got a lot that are on our live stream listening in and worshiping with us. And so it's good to be together. It's always great to have an opportunity to worship together. It's wonderful to hear our muffled voices as we sing. It's a little bit different than if we didn't have these masks on, but that's still good to hear each one singing. And I want to just add my note to the Wilsons who have been with us for a period of time. And if you doubt what a couple can accomplish, I would just use them as Exhibit A. They have been with us. They have been enthusiastic. They have encouraged us by their faithful attendance. Danny has taken part in the public worship, and we hate to see them go, but our prayers are going to be with them. And they're moving out to Foley, Alabama, southern Alabama, just a little bit west of Pensacola. So they're not all that far away, and we hope that we'll see them again, have occasion to visit with them. And we certainly pray for the good that they can do there. It is the end of the month, and so we've said that we're going to monitor things and make decisions month by month. And so I think our plan for this coming month, with, again, a lot of uncertainty, is to continue as we have for the last few months. We'll have our Sunday morning service at 10 o'clock, and then we will have our other services online so that we can follow. I think the thing that we dislike the most about this, other than not being able to do the things we normally do, is not having our classes for the children. But I know right now, children and classes are a big issue, aren't they? Big concern. So I certainly sympathize with the teachers among us who are having to go through a lot in terms of planning and thinking. And so we will remain with that plan for this coming month and hope that things will improve, that not too far away we can do things more to what we are normally accustomed. If you've been reading in our Bible reading, last week you read from Nehemiah, several selected chapters. And these are important chapters. I think if we think about Nehemiah, probably most of us know what Nehemiah is about. There's the 32nd version of Nehemiah. Nehemiah heard that the walls of Jerusalem were in disrepair, and so he went back to Jerusalem and he caused those walls to be rebuilt. That's the 32nd or 22nd version. We're going to look at the 30-minute version this morning. We're going to consider some of the things, not all of the things, that happen with the efforts that Nehemiah makes in rebuilding the walls of the city. And there are just any number of practical applications that we can make that I hope will be helpful to us. So let's look. We're going to focus particularly on chapters 1 to 4, but let's title our lesson here, Get to Work. I think that's really the bottom line as far as Nehemiah is concerned. He gets to work himself. He urges the people to get to work, and they do get to work. They rebuild the walls of the city. And I'm going to stop just for a moment because I forgot to mention Mark McBride being here, and he's going back out to the Gulf, so he's out there for a while, then he comes back. We've enjoyed having him back, but let's keep him in our prayers as he goes back out there. So I meant to add that. Anyway, let's think about Nehemiah rebuilding the walls of the city. And Nehemiah is in the city of Susa. That's the capital city of Persia, the Medo-Persian Empire. The setting is about 444 BC during the reign of Artaxerxes, one of the Persian kings, who reigned for about 40 years. This is about midway through his reign. And so we pick up here in the month of Kislev. That would have been comparable to the end of our year, mid-November to mid-December. And Nehemiah is described as being the cupbearer to the king, a responsible position, not like a dishwasher or a butler or someone. He's someone who tests the king's wine before he drinks it to make sure that it's not poison or won't harm him. And so I think it attests to Nehemiah's character and ability, just like Daniel's position as a prophet did when he was with the Babylonians and the Medes and Persians. So here he is in the city of Susa, and we pick up there in chapter 1, and I hope you have your Bibles open because we're going to look at some of the verses here, and I think it'll help to see those verses for yourself. He is in a position of prominence, And Hanani, one of his brothers, comes from Jerusalem. And notice that Nehemiah asked him concerning the Jews who had survived the exile. And it says, ask concerning Jerusalem. And the response was, the wall of Jerusalem is broken down and its gates are destroyed by fire. Now notice this with me about Nehemiah. I think this whole first chapter is about a man who cares very much about his people, though he is distanced from them. He's hundreds of miles away. I don't know what the background was. We don't know what his story is. Other than he's a Jew, he's in the position that he is, he finds out about the disrepair in Jerusalem. And so I would suggest to you that he cared enough to ask about the city. He was in a position of prominence. He could have ignored what's happening hundreds of miles away. That was not the case. And so he was saddened to learn about the struggle of these people back there to survive. You know, sometimes we say, well, ignorance is bliss. Or we say, don't ask. And there might be reasons sometime to have that sort of attitude. That was not Nehemiah's attitude. He wanted to know what was happening. And when he found out what was happening, he cared enough to actually weep. It says in verse 4 that he was weeping and fasting for days, mourning what he had heard. He was touched and upset by the news that he'd heard about his people. He was like Jeremiah, who describes in Jeremiah 9, verse 1, his face being a fountain of tears, his eyes being a fountain of tears. Paul, we studied Wednesday night, chapter 2, says, I'm writing you in much affliction, anguish of heart, with many tears. Think of Jesus as he approaches Jerusalem. It says, when he drew near, he saw the city and he wept over it. So Nehemiah is like these. He's touched, and this is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of caring, a sign of strength. He cares for his people, and he cares enough to pray. Look at this great prayer in verses 5 to 11. It starts with praise toward God. Verse 5, Nehemiah prays, O Lord God of heaven, the great and awesome God, who keeps covenant and steadfast love with those who love him and keep his commandments. You want to know how to start a prayer? Here's an ideal way of how to start a prayer. God, you are awesome. You are great. You keep your covenant. You're steadfast. You're loyal to your people, especially those who love you and keep your commandments. And then he proceeds to confess the sin of the people. And he includes himself in that audience. He says, God, be attentive, verse 6, and let your eyes be open, your ear attentive, your eyes open. We confess the sin of the people. And he says, we have sinned against you. And then he does something interesting. He cites God's teaching that has caused all of this to happen. His prayer was based upon what God had revealed. What God had revealed was, way back in Leviticus 26 and Deuteronomy 28 to 30, before the people went into the land, he said, I'll bless you if you obey my will, but if you disobey, I'm going to take you out. I'm going to scatter you amongst all the people. But then in chapter 30, he said, if you'll turn back to my will, I'll gather you together and bring you back to a place of my choosing. He was confident in the prayer that he prayed. Chapter 1, verse 10. He prays, they are your servants and your people whom you have redeemed by your great power and by your strong hand. God, you've done what you said you would do. You've brought your people back to a place that you have chosen, back to Jerusalem. You've kept your word according to what you have said that you would do. And then I want you to notice in verse 11, as he closes that prayer, he prays, O Lord, let your ear be attentive to the prayer of your servant and to the prayer of your servants who delight to fear your name, and give success to your servant today. And grant him mercy in the sight of this man. There's a sense in which Nehemiah is not just praying with great despair over what's happened. He's praying with a heart of faith that says, God, I believe you'll do what you said you would do, and I'm going to be a part of this project. His prayer led him to act. He prays to God, give success to your servant in the sight of this man being Artaxerxes, the king over Medo-Persia. Perhaps he was reminded of the proverb 21 and verse 1, where the writer writes, "The king's heart is a stream of water in the hand of the Lord. He turns it wherever he will." Now, those verses are translated differently in different versions. One version says, "He channels the water." The picture is not just of some stream that's rolling through the countryside. The picture is of irrigation that would take place in a dry and parched land. If you've ever been around farming very much, and irrigation particularly, the kind that they used to do, was they would have a stream running and then they would channel it out to places where it was needed. The writer says, "Lord, you can take the heart of the king and you can cause it to accomplish your will accordingly." And so Nehemiah's prayer to his father is, "Lord, give me mercy in the sight of this man, as I seek to accomplish what it is that I can." Nehemiah saw the big picture of what God was trying to accomplish, and he saw himself as a part of that picture. Isn't that true about salvation? Yeah, we're part of God's salvation, but we play a part in that picture. Each one of us. And so this first section, I think, illustrates how Nehemiah cares and how he expresses that through his prayer. Not so much about man's will being done in heaven, but God's will being done upon the earth. He was like Abraham, who went and rescued Lot, or like Esther, who risked her life so that her people wouldn't be wiped out, or like Paul, who spent his life preaching the gospel, or like Jesus, who gave his life so that we could have salvation. Do we care? I believe we do. I see evidence of that everywhere I look, expressions that indicate it. Those who ask, those who act after asking, those who pray about things. I am always heartened by the prayers that we pray together, because I think it evidences a great concern for each other, for God, for his will, for each other, and for those who are hurting and need help. We need to care. Notice with me in chapter 2 that Nehemiah responded with his faith. It's interesting how these events unfold, because in chapter 2, what we learn in the opening verses of that chapter is Nehemiah, wanting to act, had to wait. I said a moment ago that the events of chapter 1 happened in the month, well, I don't know that I mentioned the month, Kislev. And in chapter 2, the month is Nisan. Not Nisan, Nisan. That's the first month of the Jewish calendar, about our month April. 4 months later, 4 months, Nehemiah has waited to make a request of the king. He's asked for God's help. No doubt he is planning. Now he has opportunity. In that month, Nisan, it says, "I was standing before the king, I was serving him. I hadn't been sad in his presence." You don't want to be sad in the presence of the king. He can have you banished for that. Nehemiah was not a court jester, but he wanted to appear as someone who would help the king. But the king asked him, "Are you sad in your heart, Nehemiah?" And Nehemiah's answer, verse 3, is, "Let the king live forever. Why should not my face be sad when the city, the place of my father's graves, lies in ruins and the gates have been destroyed by fire?" Of course I'm sad. Who wouldn't be? The city of my homeland lies in tatters. There's a need for help. And so it seems that Nehemiah, even though he has been waiting, he has been thinking, he has been planning. And that will even become more apparent as we continue. The king responds, verse 4, "What are you requesting?" All right, Nehemiah, what do you want? And then listen to the second part of verse 4. "So I prayed to the God of heaven," verse 5, "and I said to the king." Did you get that? Between the king's question and Nehemiah's response, Nehemiah prays to God. I don't know what he prayed. It probably was a short prayer. It probably was asking for God's help, like we had just mentioned. Do you detect a pattern here on the part of Nehemiah, praying to God? And so he asked the king for permission to go back and to rebuild the city. And after the king asked him, well, how long is that going to take? And Nehemiah tells him, the king allows him to go. But it's apparent that Nehemiah has been thinking, because he said, I need permission so that I'll be able to make the journey all the way there. And when I get there, I need some lumber with which to rebuild the walls and other things. As I suggest, it's apparent that he's been thinking. And that section ends in verse 8 with this statement, and the king granted me what I asked for. The good hand of God was upon me. Nehemiah knew why things were going the way that they were. God was with him. He had asked for God's help, and God was helping him every step of the way. Then in verses 11 to 18, Nehemiah makes his way back to Jerusalem. That would have taken some time. Verse 9 tells us that there were enemies there. There were people surrounding the city of Jerusalem. There was Sanballat the Samaritan. There was Tobiah the Ammonite. There was Geshem the Arab. These must have been leaders of the people who lived all around that town. And we're going to find out they're in opposition to what Nehemiah is trying to do, protect the people. But when he gets back, notice what he does. What he does is he sort of quietly surveys the scene. In fact, it says, for 3 days, I really didn't do anything at all. I told no one what my God had put into my heart to do for Jerusalem. And then it describes him getting up in the middle of night and going out and surveying the walls of the city. He was taking stock of where things stood. He was doing planning. The wheels were turning, even though he hadn't said anything to anyone yet. And then down at the end of that section, verses 16, said the officials did not know where I'd gone, what I was doing. I'd not yet told the Jews and all the different people about this. Verse 17, he then confronts them and he says, you see the trouble we are in, how Jerusalem lies in ruins with its gates burned. Come, let us build the wall of Jerusalem that we may no longer suffer derision. Folks, we got a problem. Let's do something about it. And obviously he had planned. He says, I told them about the hand of God that had been upon me. And then he says, let us rise up and build. So they strengthened their hands for the good work. It always helps to plan and to think ahead. And we usually do when we're trying to accomplish something that's important. And so he asked for and he received their help. Now let's go on to chapter 3 that Deacon read a moment ago. And I've termed this wall-to-wall workers. We're not going to read all of chapter 3. 32 verses of detail about building the city walls. Here's an artist's impression of what that city looked like. Those are the walls having been rebuilt, but you see the perimeter there, the outline up in the north part of the city would have been where the temple was. And then we get a little bit better view of that. But what these verses tell us in chapter 3 was that a lot of people got busy and got to work and helped repair the walls. The walls had been burnt and torn down when the Babylonians had come in and destroyed Jerusalem back in 586 BC. So for about 150 years, they had been lying in disrepair. And so having taken stock of that, Nehemiah gets the people to work. I just want to read those verses again that Deacon read. Just listen to what's going on. Verse 1, then Eliashib, the high priest, rose up with his brothers, the priests, and they built the sheep gate. They consecrated it and set its doors. They consecrated it as far as the Tower of the 100, as far as the Tower of Hananel. And next to him, the men of Jericho built. And next to him, Zachar, the son of Imri, built. The sons of Hassaniah built the fish gate. They let its beams and set its doors, its bolts, and its bars. Verse 4, and next to them, Meremoth, the son of Uriah, the son of Hakaz, repaired. And next to them, Meshullam, the son of Berechiah, son of Shezabel, repaired. And next to them, Zadok, the son of Baana, repaired. Do you understand what's happening? Each section is being taken by a group. 38 different people, 42 different groups of people mentioned. And they're all working systematically, methodically, rebuilding the walls, building and reinforcing the walls. And they were able to accomplish a great deal by that. And I would simply suggest, from that brief analysis, that when you think about any work that needs to be accomplished, there's a lot of good we can do as individuals, but there's a lot that we can accomplish as a group together. Whether it's a family, whether it's a community, whether it's a church, it takes all of us working together, doesn't it? To accomplish the good things that God wants us to accomplish in our lives. Well, let's look at the last section here, chapter 4. Because they met some opposition, and usually when you try to do something that's worth doing, you're going to meet some kind of opposition. Sometimes hard to tell what that's going to be. You know, I've heard this political philosophy that supposedly some espouse, don't let a crisis go to waste. Well, I don't know if anybody's actually working on that basis or how much they might be accomplishing if they are. But I will tell you this. I know someone who doesn't let a crisis go to waste, and that's Satan. He's going to do anything he can to accomplish his purposes, to discourage us as God's people, to frustrate us, to get us to think we can't be successful in what we're supposed to be doing. He doesn't let a crisis go to waste. What we read about here in the early verses of chapter 4 are what you might describe as psychological warfare. You know, we mentioned those enemies a moment ago. I want you to notice that this building that we described in chapter 3 is kind of taking places in stages, and you get sort of a glimpse of what's happening in chapter 4. That yes, it's happening, but it happens despite the opposition that's taking place. Listen to verse 2 of chapter 4. Sanballat heard that we were building the wall. He got angry. He was greatly enraged. He started to jeer at the Jews. What did he say? Verse 2. Well, he began to ridicule them. Isn't that what you do when you don't like what someone's doing? You start making fun of them. What are these feeble Jews doing? Will they restore it for themselves? Will they sacrifice? What are you going to do? Start offering sacrifices to rebuild the walls? Will they finish up in a day? You think you're going to do this overnight? Will they revive the stones out of the heaps of rubbish and burn ones at that? You can imagine the Jews picking through the destruction of those walls and yet finding the materials they needed by which to rebuild the walls. And Sanballat all the time making fun of what they were doing. And then Tobiah chimes in, verse 3. He begins to mock the finished product. He says, yes, what are they building? If a fox goes up on it, he'll break down their stone wall. Why, don't let anything up there. Why, that wall will fall down. Ridicule. Well, how did Nehemiah respond? With prayer. Are you surprised? He seems to be invested in prayer. Verses 4 and 5, hear, O God, for we are despised. Turn back their taunt on their own heads. And he proceeds to say, Lord, punish them for what they're doing. Not because he's seeking personal vengeance, but because they're opposing the God of heaven. And then listen to verse 6. It says, so we built the wall, and all the wall was joined together to half its height. For the people had a mind to work. They were making progress. They weren't going to be kept from accomplishing what it was that God wanted them to do. Working requires a mind to work. I see some people out working hard physical labor. I've done a little bit of that in my lifetime. And I guarantee you, it takes an attitude of saying, I'm going to go out there and do what needs to be done. That's the attitude that these people had as they worked upon the wall. And then these enemies and the Ashdodites are said to join in, so it's almost as if Jerusalem was surrounded by all of these enemies. It says they decided they were going to cause confusion because, verse 7, they saw the progress was going forward and the breaches were beginning to be closed. Hey, this thing's starting to rise out of the ruins, and they're accomplishing what they intended to. We're going to cause confusion. What did Nehemiah do? Look at verse 9. We prayed to our God, and we set a guard as protection against them day and night. Sometimes you need protection. And so Nehemiah was intent upon providing that. And then it says in verses 10 to 12 that there was discouragement and fear. That's often the case. When you're trying to accomplish something and there's opposition, it's easy to get discouraged. In fact, verse 10 of chapter 4 says it was men from the tribe of Judah. Of course, that was mainly what this southern kingdom was about, the tribe of Judah. But listen to what they say. The strength of those who bear the burdens is failing. There's too much rubble. By ourselves, we'll not be able to rebuild the wall. Sometimes you get the most discouraged when you get about halfway through the project. You get started and you think you're making some progress, and it doesn't go exactly like you thought, and it's easy to get discouraged. And then there was apparently rumor, our enemies said they will not know or see till we come among them and kill them and stop the work. We're going to threaten them. And then at that time, the Jews who lived near them came from all directions and said to us 10 times, you must return to us. Don't be doing this work. Come back to where you came from. I would suggest that Nehemiah counters this by really taking some tangible steps that were helpful in completing the wall. Among the things that you read in the rest of the chapter, we'll not go through all of those, but he had some of the men take and put a sword on their side so that they were armed, and it says they had a weapon in one hand and they were working with the other hand. Can you imagine that picture? We're going to go on working here, but we're ready to stand and fight if it's necessary to do that. Nehemiah said, we'll gather the people together in groups. And if there is an attack, we'll cause the trumpet to sound, and all of the people can rally to that point. And he says at the end of verse 20, our God will fight for us. What a spirit, what an attitude Nehemiah possessed. And the end result was they built the wall. We're skipping over some events in chapters 5 and 6 that go right in line with the other things that we've been saying. But I want you to notice that the wall was rebuilt, it says, after 52 days. 52 days, 2 months. And they finished the job. And now the city was able to be defended. That's not the end of Nehemiah, but that's the end of our lesson this morning. What does it take to accomplish a purpose? What does it take to accomplish God's purpose? Well, there are some steps that are important. And let's just close by making some personal application. A lot of times we have to rebuild walls in our life, and those walls may be a lot of different things. It might be relationships, it might be challenges that we face. We need to be looking and constantly repairing the things that need work. You know, as a homeowner, what's the easiest thing to do when you see a problem? Well, that'll go away. And usually they don't, do they? You got to get out there and you got to fix it. It requires, and I didn't put these in the right order, I would say it requires planning and wisdom and prayer, as a result of which effort comes into play. All those things are part of this message in Nehemiah, and they're part of what's said here. It takes joint effort, doesn't it? We've got to be involved with each other. We can't do it alone. That's why God has established, yes, a universal church, but a local church to help each of us as we work together. And then finally, a realization that it's God who will enable us to complete our task. We have work to do. We have some uncertain times during which we're facing challenges that we never dreamed of a year ago, did we? Did we think we'd be meeting in this capacity? What's going to happen? I don't know. But I will tell you that we can accomplish what God wants us to do as Christians. We don't have to give up. We don't have to stop fighting Satan. We don't have to give in. We don't have to be discouraged. We can accomplish the will that God has for us. I hope if you're here this morning, you're not a Christian, that you will be aware that really to repair the walls that need repairing in your life, it starts with the salvation that God offers us through the gospel, through the forgiveness that Jesus has blessed us with in his Son, Jesus Christ. And if you're here this morning and you want to obey that gospel, we've chosen a song of invitation to sing to encourage you to do that.